course, firms have been front-running the existing tariffs. And of course, as you know, front-running effectively means that companies anticipate higher tariff increases and strategically import more goods before the higher tariffs are implemented to avoid paying the increased costs. So it will take some months, probably 4 to 6, for the effects to fully show. But having said that, we've already had some bad news.
But we're now going to cross the Atlantic and talk about tariffs. New research has suggested that US President Donald Trump's international tariffs have not negatively impacted the American economy as badly as many economists feared. Analysis from Deutsche Bank shows that American and foreign firms, rather than consumers, are currently taking the brunt of the tariff hikes through lower profits. In June, America's core consumer prices rose by 0.2% on the previous month, which was actually below the consensus estimate of 0.3%. So talking us through these developments is Andrew Hale, analyst in trade policy at the right-leaning think tank, the Heritage Foundation. Good afternoon, Andrew, or I probably should say good morning to you. You're in Washington.
Morning.
Yes. I hope you heard my little introduction then. Would you say that that's a fair account of these early stages?
Well, I think we have to bear in mind that most of the Trump tariffs are being held in abeyance as the foreign retaliatory tariffs. So obviously, President Trump just last Friday issued another pause on most of the tariffs until Thursday of this week. So again, we had another little pause. But most of the tariffs have been held in abeyance. And of course, firms have been front-running the existing tariffs. And of course, as you know, front-running effectively means that companies anticipate higher tariff increases and strategically import more goods before the higher tariffs are implemented to avoid paying the increased costs. So it will take some months, probably 4 to 6, for the effects to fully show. But having said that, we've already had some bad news. I mean, 6 plants have closed in Michigan. We, of course, had one by Stellantis that closed, as well as a blast furnace of Cleveland Cliffs to make steel was idled. And basically, we got some very bad employment data on Friday.
And you think that's largely to do with tariffs rather than other global economic...
Absolutely. Already, just because the
explain to our listeners why these plants are closing, if you don't mind.
Well, just even if you look at agriculture, are because of the retaliatory tariffs from China, our soybean farmers are advocating for a bailout due to the negative impacts on ongoing trade disputes, particularly with China. And these farmers are facing significant financial strain, with some farmers selling their crops below production cost. That's why their association came to me and said, would you support a bailout? And I said, no, we need to get rid of the tariffs. They're causing the problem. And so I think we're going to see a lot more of this as time goes by. If you look at, for example, just if Michigan, again, I want to focus on because, we've had this horrific 35% tariff announced in Canada. Now, look, Canada's not...
Because Michigan is the sort of home of your automobile industry, isn't it?
Yes, Stellantis, Ford, and GM, yes. Yeah. And in the manufacturing process, we're not importing finished goods from Canada. We're importing intermediate goods. And on average, within the auto sector, those products crisscross the US-Canadian border on average 5 times that process. Are we seriously going to tariff them every time they cross the border? Because Americans will be the ones paying for those tariffs.
Well, what is it that Trump, this is sort of realms of speculation, but what is it that Trump has against Canada? It's sort of, I know that he says that Canada isn't doing enough to deal with the cross-border trade in fentanyl, the drug, but that seems inadequate explanation for very tough policies towards you think you're America's most important trade, or traditionally most important trading partner.
Well, exactly, and of course there is some there's something behind it. I mean, he famously did not get along with Justin Trudeau, and of course human relations sometimes get the most difficult. He's been getting along very well with President Claudia Sheinbaum of Mexico. She's been amenable to many of the things that he suggested.
And he suspended the tariffs on Mexico again after saying he wouldn't. So she's obviously had some charming effect, but Mark Carney doesn't seem to be having the same effect on
no,
your
I don't
president.
think so, and I don't think they have much in common. I mean, remember, Trump is not anyone. He's about drill, baby, drill, and Mark Carney is very much wedded to net zero targets, ESG, DEI, all these things that President Trump got elected to destroy. So they really don't have much in common.
But it shouldn't be what determines policy, though, is it? America and Canada are some that we used to be still are, I hope, the closest of friends in many ways. Is there any sort of voices within the Republican Party, Trump's own party, registering concern that Trump is pursuing this policy?
Of course, because there's $6 billion in trade between just Maine and Canada alone annually. And the Republican Senator Susan Collins from Maine has been very vocal in this, and she signed a letter to the president along with other border states who are obviously adversely affected with these tariffs against Canada. Look, anti-American sentiment in Canada right now is up to levels higher even during the Vietnam War.
Wow.
It's exceptionally high, and President Trump's bullying of Canada and calling it 51st state and things like that actually led to the Liberal Party's renaissance. They had a 5% chance of winning, and they had this total turnaround in renaissance because
it's one of the biggest switch rounds in polling history. Familiar with that, but could I just return to Susan Collins and the Republican resistance to Donald Trump? Our parties in Britain are notoriously divided, always rebelling against their leader. What I don't understand is I think the tariffs policy is less unpopular than it was, but after Liberation Day, it was quite an unpopular policy. Don't these Republican sort of voices inside his party having any real effects on Donald Trump?
Well, there's two things that's going on there. First of all, we have midterm elections next year, and they have to get through the primaries. And when congressmen and senators challenge President Trump, Republican ones, they have a tendency to get primaried, and they're worried about that. So they can put up a candidate against them within the primaries before they actually stand against the Democrats in the midterm general election. So that's one issue. I think once we get past the primaries, there'll be more pushback from members of Congress. But when I've spoken to congressmen, senators, and their staff, they tell me they're hoping that the courts will actually deal with this. And of course, two lower courts have already ruled against the administration. Americans have brought cases against the administration's use of emergency legislation to impose these Liberation Day tariffs. And so far, we just had oral arguments with an en banc panel of 11 judges last Thursday. Okay. And after watching all of that, I'm very optimistic that those 11 judges, most of them are going to vote against rule against the administration. Okay.
But before our time's up, can I just ask you one final question, please, Andrew? Your president has just sacked Erika McEntaffer, I hope that's pronunciation is half decent, Commissioner of Labour Statistics. He did this after hours after data revealed jobs growth stalled this summer, not what he wanted. How has that gone down in your country?
It's been very controversial. President Trump seeks to blame someone for unwelcome economic news. I think that's what it bears down to. I mean, you have to remember the commissioner does not determine what the numbers are, but simply reports on what the data is. And to allege that she rigged them, the process of obtaining the numbers is decentralized by design to avoid, opportunities for interference. And this is data that's relied upon not just by the United States, but around the world. And when this has happened in other countries, they start attacking and try to politicize the data. It calls into question the whole system, and it's very, very worrying. And I'll finish with this. Bill Beach, her predecessor, who was appointed by President Trump in his first term, he basically has come out very much in support of her and said that this was totally wrong and there's no evidence. They provided no evidence to defend this thing of allegation of rigging. It's really quite deeply concerning, actually.
Well, Andrew, thank you so much for your time this morning. I hope you have a lovely day. And thank you very much to Andrew Hale, analyst in trade policy at the Heritage Foundation.